What's up, everybody? Chuck Amerson here. We're going to start doing this thing called Buck Talk. Buck Talk. I'm going to come on here every week. We're going to talk about deer hunting. I'm going to share some tips and tricks, and I want y'all to share some tips and tricks with me in the comments. So, first off, I enjoy a good deer hunting conversation. And if you followed me on like Carolina Swamp Calls or anything, or one of my Facebook pages, you know I go after some deer and I love it. And I try to kill some big deer. And, you know, we kill some in-betweens. But every week I'm going to pick a topic and we're going to sit here and discuss it. So join in on the comments, like I said. You know, like it and share it if you like it, and we're gonna go full steam ahead. So, one thing I want to talk about is I'm probably gonna get a lot of hate for this, but we're gonna talk about cull deer. I follow different social media pages, and I'll see these hunters take some small deer, and they're always like, you know, one cull down, or something like that. Look, I was raised up, if you're going to pull the trigger, be proud of what you're taking. I don't care if it's a spike and you're proud of it, be proud of it. No harm in that. But what I have a problem with is people trying to cull a deer. In theory, for those of you who don't know, you see a deer, typically one that's unnatural, one horn bigger than the other, and a cow horn. And there's theory out there that those deer will spread bad genes. Look, 90% of the time, the deformed antlered deer is because of injury. And people are like, well, I've been watching them for 3 years. You know what? It depends on what type of energy. Because a whitetail deer is an amazing animal. And to close up that wound, or whatever the deer's suffering with, it'll sacrifice the nutrients going to the horn, and it'll go to the wound to heal. And you know, for a year or a period of time, maybe 2 seasons, you know, sometimes 3 seasons, depending on the extent of the damage, it'll have some messed up horns. That's one theory there. You don't know what type of genes are getting spread. Because of that, you know, the deer could be suffering from injury. And then number 2, you don't know what the doe's genes are that deer is mating with. You hear me? The doe can pass the genetics from her father on her line, just like the buck can pass the genetics on his line. So when you're dealing with wild deer, you have no idea. You could shoot that buck and get him out of here. Guess what? You have no idea what his offspring are going to be like. It's just like rolling the dice with people. You know, what color eyes are your offspring going to have? There's no telling. What kind of genes are going to get passed down from that doe? We don't know. So if you're out there and you're trying to take out these cull bucks, I disagree with that. That's my opinion. You know, I'm sure people are going to say, well, this, and this, and once I got them out of here, my herd healed up. Okay. You know, the genetics is what I'm speaking of. You know, you could have got that deer out of there, and all your other deer that come from years later could have some really good horns. That's fine. I'm not arguing with you. I'm just telling you the science behind it. Okay? I mean, it's even been proven that depending on the season, especially here in South Carolina, we have a season, and the sex ratio is off between the bucks and does, and you have does that are getting bred really late, not during the rut, but later on in the year, and then they're having their offspring, um, you know, in the fall, or late summer, fall. We're seeing little babies with spots all around South Carolina. I mean, y'all know what I'm talking about. And the problem is that those little buck fawns, when they're coming up and they're after the spring and after the summer, and they're into fall and winter, they don't get those same nutrients that early born buck fawn gets, where he's got the spring foliage and he's got the summer. Guess what that buck fawn's getting? They're getting all the late season stuff. So if you don't have good nutrients in your area, that buck fawn is more than likely not going to produce a good rack his first year. He's going to be behind. So, you can't necessarily look at these like cow horns, because they're not getting nutrients that others are getting, and take them out thinking you're going to keep the herd from getting infected with a cow horn deer. It's not true. And I'll argue that all day long, because what are we feeding the deer in the fall and the winter? Heavily, we're feeding them corn. Corn is not nutritious. So these little buck fawns that are born late in the season, they're getting on this carbohydrate, low in protein. They're just eating this corn. It's free. It's out there. We're overfeeding them. Yeah. We're part of the reason heavily corning these deer, that they're not out there foraging, and these little bucks aren't getting the nutrients they need at the first of their lives to just poof start growing some antlers, some big antlers. What a lot of us are after, and there's no harm in wanting a good rack. There's no harm in it at all. I'm in it for the meat, for the horns, the growth of the deer, the thrill of the hunt. I like it all. And the nutrients in your area, they heavily contribute to what you're calling cull deer. Do you have high nutritional foliage in your area? You know what I have in my area? Across my hunting land, I've planted 45 apple trees. I've got hundreds of persimmon trees back there. I've got Japanese persimmon, American persimmon. I've got sawtooth acorns. I've got, your run-of-the-mill oak trees. I've got acorns for days that fall in the fall. I throw radishes, just seeds, just broadcast them out in the fields. If you really know me, you know that I use very little corn. I'll take a 5-gallon bucket and throw it out there, just enough to draw some deer in. I'm not looking to feed them corn. I want them to eat the healthy stuff. I want them to grow some hefty racks. I want them to get the nutrition that they need. I'll take, protein, this rack growth, this heavy nutritious stuff, and I'll throw it out, spring, summer, fall, winter. I'll put some bags out and bags out and bags out. I want my deer to be heavily nutritious. I want them to have everything they need to produce big racks. And I'm not banking on, my neighbors over here might be feeding them corn. Over here, they might be feeding them corn. But I know that right here, I'm feeding them what they need. And that nutrition is going to contribute to the whole herd. The does are going to be healthier. The fawns are going to be healthier. The little buck fawns, they've got all they need throughout the year, late season, early season, whatever. And, I just want them to have the good racks. I don't have these deer that I feel like I have to cull out the herd. And, that's another thing is like, a buck fawn will typically, he's not going to stick around to when he gets to breeding age in your area. Those deer will travel, when they get to a certain age, they'll travel miles to find their own area, their own zone. You know, I'm not saying all of them do that, but I'm saying the mass majority will. Tagged deer, buck fawns have been known to travel 1 to 5 miles a day when they're looking for an area to take up on. So, you know, some of them have gone out further. I think the research showed 20 miles to where they finally take up a residence. So if you think that buck is your problem and he's spreading bad genes, I disagree with it, because the genes you're seeing are you know, can be contributed off your dose, or more than likely the nutrition that's in your area. And you know, don't hate me for saying this, but like, you know, I think pouring a bunch of corn on the ground, making it easy for the deer, it does more harm than good. You know, yeah, it draws them to it. It's a great bait. Deer love corn. It's not good for their digestive system. It can heavily, if you overfeed and do these mass amounts of corn, it can contribute to dehydration. It can contribute to I think ketoacidosis in deer. Messes with their digestive system. So when you think you're throwing out and you're feeding these deer and feeding them, you know, sometimes you're doing more harm than good. I recommend enough to keep them there. 5-gallon bucket here or there, you know, and you don't necessarily have to do that. You know, make you a good food plot. That's what I recommend. A good food plot goes a long ways. But like I said, you know, today we were just going to talk about culling deer. You know, and it's been proven that these small little buck fawns, they'll stay cow horns for years, and then they'll just, you know, turn into something nice. That's a decent deer right there. You know, and we can't look back, just looking at this thing, we can't look back and say, oh, he was a cow horn for his whole life. He could have got the nutrients he needed right off. He could have been a late bloomer. He could have been one of them late season bucks that was like a year behind that I was talking about. You know, birth late in the summer, didn't quite get the nutrients at the first of his life. You know, but when he took up residence, it's obvious he got some nutrients when he found this good place and got all the nutrition. You know, another one is this right here, and this was a younger deer, and you know, he's a nice rack little buck. But again, the nutrition we feed these things, I love that palmation right there. The nutrition we feed these things is key. Your does can, you know, when you're talking about culling bucks, it's just important to remember, don't shoot all these little bucks, because we can't see what genes they're carrying. We can't see what genes that the does are carrying that are pushing down on these bucks. We could shoot the bucks, boom, 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 take all the cow horns out. You know what? What do you do if the does are the one passing the genes? What are you doing if the nutrition is your problem? You've just killed your deer herd. You've just severely hurt your chances of future bucks, you know, blossoming and blooming when you could have been concentrating on the nutrition the whole time. But, you know, that's neither here or there. To each his own. I'm just, you know, food for thought, literally. Like I said, you know, where I hunt at, when I planted all these apple trees and I do a garden over there and forget about it, and radishes and everything else, I show some of my deer cam pictures to my buddies, and they're all really impressed. You know, I get compliments all the time. Even some big name hunters, really big name hunters, have looked at some of my deer pictures and been like, that is a nice one, man. And we're talking about South Carolina deer. You know, and for these guys that hunting Illinois and Kansas and stuff, and they're looking at it and they're like, man, that is a good deer for down there. That says a lot, and it makes me feel like, hey, doing something right. So that's our talk for today. Went a little longer than I thought it was, 15 minutes. But hey, you got any comments? Leave them to me. But this is something I plan on doing, once a week. We're just going to sit back and chat and just do a buck talk. Give me some comments on what you want next week's subject to be. And we'll look at it and see. But like I said, when you're talking about those cull deer, just keep in mind there's a whole lot more that goes into it. You're not going to get your herd infested from a buck because chances are the little buck's going to go. So if you're having repeated horn growth, could be the genes, but it's probably not the buck passing the genes. It's probably a doe. Especially, it's a 50-50 chance. So before you go swatting at all your bucks, you might want to do a little bit of doe detail. But anyway, this is Chuck Amerson. I'll see y'all later.